The old house always settled in a particular way when dusk fell. A gentle sigh of timbers and a soft whisper of wind around the eaves that I had grown accustomed to over the years. A comforting rhythm that spoke of solitude. A deep, quiet peace that wrapped itself around me like a familiar blanket. I had lived there for a long time, longer than most people stay in one place these days, and every creak, every groan of the ancient structure had become part of the background music of my life. My parents were away, as they often were on these late summer evenings, visiting friends or attending some small-town gathering that held no interest for me, leaving me to the quiet expanse of the house, a rare treat I always looked forward to. I remember the clock on the mantelpiece ticking with a slow, deliberate cadence, each second stretching into a small eternity, a soothing sound that usually lulled me into a state of contented detachment, allowing my thoughts to wander freely. I was reading, I think, a rather thick novel, the kind that transports you completely to another world, making the boundaries of your own reality blur and soften. The lamp beside my armchair cast a warm, golden pool of light, illuminating the page and leaving the rest of the living room in a soft, welcoming gloom. Outside, the night was drawing in, painting the windows with shades of deep indigo and violet, and the crickets had begun their nightly chorus, a steady, rhythmic hum that was another comforting fixture of these quiet evenings. I remember feeling perfectly at ease, utterly absorbed in the narrative, the kind of deep focus where you forget where you are, who you are, lost entirely in the lives of fictional characters. It was a feeling I cherished, this quiet immersion, a rare moment of complete disconnection from the small anxieties of everyday life, a gentle escape. Then it happened. Not a sudden, jarring noise, nothing that would immediately snap me out of my literary trance, but a subtle shift, a delicate whisper of sound that seemed to ripple through the stillness. It was a sound that didn't belong, a note that was out of place in the familiar symphony of the old house. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible, a fleeting suggestion of something amiss. I remember my eyes flicking up from the page, not in alarm, but in a sort of mild, curious inquiry, like when you hear a distant, unfamiliar bird call. I listened, holding my breath almost unconsciously, trying to discern if my imagination was playing tricks on me, or if the house was simply settling in a new, slightly different way tonight. The crickets outside continued their chirping, oblivious, and the clock on the mantelpiece maintained its steadfast rhythm, marking the seconds with an unwavering certainty. But there it was again, clearer this time, a soft, almost hesitant sound, like wood groaning under a sudden, unexpected pressure. My mind, still half immersed in the novel's world, began to piece together fragments, trying to assign a logical explanation, perhaps a branch scraping against the window pane or the old pipes rattling, a common occurrence in a house of this age. But deep down, a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor of unease began to stir within me, a subtle shift in the air, a sense that the familiar comfort was being gently, ever so slightly disturbed. It was the kind of feeling that makes the hairs on your arms stand up, even before your conscious mind has fully registered why. I closed my book slowly, carefully, placing it face down on the armrest, a silent acknowledgement that my reading time was, for the moment, on hold. My ears strained, trying to pinpoint the source, to understand what this new, unwelcome sound truly was. The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with expectation. No longer the peaceful quiet I had known, but a watchful, listening silence, as if the very air itself was holding its breath alongside me. My heart began to beat a little faster, a soft thrumming beneath my ribs, a gentle acceleration that was just enough to make me aware of it. And then, unmistakably, it came again, a distinct, deliberate creak. It was the front door. There was no mistaking the sound, that specific, deep groaning of the old oak door as it swung inward on its ancient hinges. It wasn't the wind, I knew that for certain. The windows were closed, and there wasn't even a breeze stirring the leaves outside. This was an interior sound, originating from within the very confines of the house, a sound that spoke of a deliberate, slow movement, a gentle yielding of wood against wood. My breath hitched in my throat, a sudden, sharp intake of air that felt strangely loud in the sudden, profound silence. The warmth of the lamp, which moments ago had felt so comforting, now seemed to shrink, casting shadows that danced and elongated in the periphery of my vision, making the familiar room suddenly feel vast and alien. My mind, which had been so pleasantly lost in the pages of a book, was now racing, frantic, trying to reconcile this impossible sound with the undeniable reality of being alone. Utterly, completely alone. My parents were not due back for hours, and no one else had a key or any reason to be here. My logical brain, usually so quick to offer rational explanations, found itself floundering, grasping at straws, trying to conjure a plausible scenario. Had I forgotten to lock it? A cold, sinking feeling began to spread through my chest. No, I was always meticulous about locking the front door, a habit ingrained since childhood. It was a ritual, a small but significant act of securing my sanctuary against the outside world. And yet, the sound had been undeniable. A wave of icy coldness washed over me, starting from my scalp and trickling down my spine, a visceral reaction that bypassed thought and went straight to the primal, animalistic part of my being. My hands, which had been resting loosely on the book, now felt clammy and a strange tremor ran through them. I wanted to move, to get up, to investigate, but my limbs felt heavy, rooted to the armchair, as if an invisible force was pressing down on me, pinning me in place. My gaze was fixed on the hallway, the dark, narrow passage that led from the living room directly to the front door, a stretch of shadow that now seemed to yawn like a gaping maw. I strained my ears again, listening with an intensity that made my head throb, desperate for any further sound, any clue, any sign of what might be happening. But there was nothing. Only the incessant chirping of the crickets outside, a maddeningly normal backdrop to the growing terror within me. The clock continued its measured tick-tock, a relentless reminder of the passage of time, each second now feeling like an eternity, stretching out, taut and brittle in the suffocating silence. My own heartbeat pounded in my ears, a frantic drumbeat that seemed to amplify the stillness, making it even more terrifying. I told myself it was nothing. It had to be nothing. Perhaps the latch was old and the wind, despite my earlier conviction, had found a way to rattle it, to push it open just a fraction. But the sound had been too deep, too definitive for a mere rattle. It had been the sound of a door being opened. Slowly, deliberately. My breath was shallow, barely disturbing the air in front of me, as if any movement, any sound from me might draw attention to my presence. The lamp, once a beacon of warmth, now felt like a spotlight, highlighting my vulnerability in the otherwise dark room. I wished desperately that I had a curtain I could pull across the hallway entrance, something to shield me, to offer even a flimsy illusion of safety. But there was only the open expanse, leading directly to the unknown beyond the front door. My eyes darted around the living room, searching for something, anything, a weapon, a hiding place, a logical escape route. But the room, usually so familiar and comforting, now seemed to mock me with its openness, its lack of immediate options. A forgotten throw blanket on the sofa, a collection of old magazines on the coffee table, nothing that offered any protection against a potential intruder. The thought intruder formed in my mind, stark and terrifying, sending another jolt of ice through my veins. It wasn't just a creak anymore. It was the implication of that creak, the meaning behind it. Someone was in the house, or at least someone had entered the house. The air felt heavy, charged with an unseen presence, a feeling that prickled at the back of my neck. I squeezed my eyes shut for a fleeting moment, as if to reset my senses, to dispel the chilling reality, hoping that when I opened them again, the world would have returned to its peaceful, solitary state. But when I did, the hallway remained dark and silent, a silent testament to the undeniable sound I had heard. The silence now was even more profound than before, broken only by the frantic hammering of my own heart against my ribs. It was the kind of silence that amplifies every internal sound, every rustle of clothing, every shallow breath. I could feel the blood thrumming in my ears, a constant, low roar that seemed to drown out all other senses, heightening my awareness of my own vulnerable body. A decision had to be made, a choice between remaining frozen in terror or attempting to understand what was happening. But even the thought of moving felt monumental, an insurmountable task. What if I made a sound? What if they heard me? The they forming in my mind was still vague, undefined, but undeniably present, an unseen entity lurking somewhere just beyond my line of sight. My imagination, usually a source of comfort and creativity, now turned against me, painting vivid, terrifying scenarios in the darkness of the hallway. I pictured a shadowy figure, tall and silent, standing just inside the front door, listening, waiting just as I was. The thought made my stomach clench with a cold, sickening fear. I gripped the armrests of the chair, my knuckles white, my fingers digging into the worn fabric, seeking some form of anchor, some connection to the tangible world. The seconds stretched into minutes, each one an agonizing eternity. My body felt rigid, every muscle tensed, ready to spring, though I had no idea where I would spring to or what I would do if I did. The quiet intimacy of the house had been shattered, replaced by an oppressive atmosphere of dread and uncertainty. I could feel the chill of the evening air seeping in from somewhere, a cold dampness that seemed to permeate the very walls, or perhaps it was just the coldness of my own fear. I tried to reason with myself to find any remaining shred of logic. Maybe it was an animal, a cat, a raccoon, but the front door latch was too secure for an animal to simply push open, and the sound had been too heavy, too human. No, it was a person, an uninvited person. My mind went to the phone, sitting innocently on the side table just a few feet away. If I could just reach it, if I could just dial for help. But the distance felt vast, an insurmountable chasm between me and any hope of safety. Any movement would be a gamble, a potential announcement of my presence. And what if they were closer than I thought? What if they were already in the living room, hidden in one of the deeper shadows, watching me, just waiting for me to make a move? The thought was paralyzing. I could feel a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead, tiny rivulets trickling down my temples. My throat felt dry and constricted, as if an invisible hand was squeezing it tight, making it difficult to swallow, to even breathe properly. The darkness beyond the golden circle of my lamp felt enormous, imbued with a menacing quality it had never possessed before. Every shadow seemed to coalesce, to take on monstrous forms, playing tricks on my tired, terrified eyes. I imagined eyes watching me from the hallway, silent, unblinking eyes that saw everything, every tremor of fear, every panicked thought racing through my mind. It was a terrifying dance between what was real and what my fear was conjuring, a blurry line that I could no longer distinguish. The silence itself became a character in this terrifying drama, an active participant pressing down on me, amplifying my internal panic. It wasn't empty silence. It was a silence filled with unspoken threats, with the heavy weight of an unknown presence. I thought of my parents so far away, oblivious to the terror that was unfolding within the walls of their home. A wave of loneliness, profound and aching, washed over me, a feeling of utter isolation. I was truly, completely alone, and that realization in that moment was perhaps more terrifying than the creaking door itself. It was the knowledge that whatever was happening, I would have to face it by myself, without anyone to turn to, anyone to call out to. The thought was a heavy stone in my stomach, weighing me down, making me feel even more vulnerable. I wished desperately for the mundane, for the return of the gentle house sounds, for the comforting tick of the clock to be the loudest thing in the room. But those sounds now seemed impossibly distant, drowned out by the roar of my own fear. My eyes, now wide and unblinking, continued to scan the hallway, trying to pierce the gloom, trying to catch even the slightest hint of movement, a ripple in the fabric of the shadows. But the darkness held its secrets close, revealing nothing. It was an absolute, impenetrable blackness, and my imagination filled it with all the horrors I could possibly conceive. I wondered if I should make a sound, a small cough, a clearing of my throat, anything to break the unbearable tension. But what if that was exactly what they were waiting for? What if my sound was an invitation, a signal that I was aware that I was here, a solitary, vulnerable target? The thought froze the breath in my lungs once more. I shifted slightly in the armchair, a barely perceptible movement, and the old springs underneath me groaned softly. The sound, though tiny, felt deafening in the profound silence of the room. I cringed, holding my breath, convinced that I had just betrayed my presence. My eyes darted to the hallway, expecting, fearing, a sudden movement, a shadowy form to emerge. But still nothing. The silence held, thick and suffocating. It was a waiting game, a silent standoff between me and whatever lurked beyond the living room. And I had no idea how long it had been, how much time had passed since that initial, horrifying creak. Minutes felt like hours, hours like an eternity. My heart continued its frantic rhythm, a relentless drumbeat against my ribs, a constant reminder of my own fear, my own vulnerability. The blood throbbed in my temples, a dull, aching sensation that seemed to synchronize with the beating of my heart. I could feel the cold dampness of my palms, a testament to the raw fear that had taken root within me. Every nerve ending felt alive, hypersensitive, straining to detect the slightest sound, the faintest whisper of movement. It was an exhausting state of being, this heightened awareness, this constant vigilance. I yearned for the return of normalcy, for the simple, comforting quiet of my evening reading. But that world seemed impossibly far away now, a distant memory that had been irrevocably shattered by a single, terrifying sound. I closed my eyes again just for a moment, a desperate attempt to gather my thoughts, to regain some semblance of control over my rapidly unraveling composure. When I opened them, the scene remained unchanged. The lamp cast its golden pool of light, the shadows danced menacingly, and the hallway stretched into an abyss of unknown horrors. The front door, I knew, was just beyond that dark passage, a portal that had, moments ago, been breached. The sheer audacity of it, the violation of my sanctuary, fueled a flicker of something new within me, a tiny ember of anger amidst the overwhelming fear. How dare someone invade my space, shatter my peace, with such chilling impunity? This new emotion, though small, offered a brief, fleeting distraction from the paralyzing terror. I took a deep, shaky breath, trying to calm the frantic hammering of my heart, trying to bring some oxygen to my light-headed brain. I needed to think, to plan, to do something other than simply sit here and wait to be discovered. But what? My mind felt like a chaotic storm, a whirlwind of panicked thoughts and terrifying images, making any coherent strategy impossible. The phone was still there, a tantalizing beacon of hope, but the risks of reaching for it still felt too great. What if the intruder was listening, waiting for just such a move? What if the sound of my hand reaching, of the phone being lifted, was all they needed to confirm my presence and location? The questions spun in my head, each one more terrifying than the last. I looked towards the window, the large bay window that overlooked the front yard. Could I escape through there? It was a possibility, a desperate one. But the living room was on the ground floor and the window was large, easily visible from the street or from the front yard itself. If an intruder was outside watching the house, I would be exposing myself completely. And what if they were already inside, having come in through the front door, and were now in the hallway or even in another room? The thought of running into them, face to face in the darkness, made my blood run cold. No, escape through the window felt too risky, too exposed. My gaze returned to the hallway, that dark, silent expanse. It was a tunnel leading to an unknown fate. I tried to imagine what was beyond it, just inside the front door. Was anyone there? Had they moved deeper into the house? Or were they just standing there, silent, listening, just like me? The uncertainty was excruciating, a slow, agonizing torture that felt worse than any definite threat. At least with a definite threat, I would know what I was dealing with. This unknown, this silent, unseen presence was far more insidious, preying on my deepest fears. My throat felt even drier now, a parched desert. I swallowed hard, a painful, rasping sound that seemed to echo in the profound silence. I could feel the tension in my jaw, in my shoulders, in every single muscle of my body. It was an exhausting state of affairs, this constant state of fight or flight without any outlet for either. I wished for a weapon, anything that could offer even a sliver of protection. A heavy book, a lamp, even a fireplace poker. But everything felt too far away, too risky to reach for. I was trapped, frozen, a deer caught in headlights, unable to move, unable to react. The clock on the mantelpiece continued its relentless ticking, each tick a reminder of the endless passage of time, each second an agonizing eternity. It was a cruel irony, this normal, everyday sound juxtaposed against the terrifying abnormality of my situation. It spoke of a world that continued on, oblivious to the silent horror unfolding in my living room. And I was stuck, suspended between the two, between the comfort of the familiar and the chilling reality of the unknown. The thought that this might not be a dream, that this was truly happening, began to sink in with a cold, heavy weight. It wasn't a story from a book. It was my story, unfolding in real time in the quiet, terrifying solitude of my own home. My mind started to replay the sound of the creak over and over, dissecting it, searching for any additional information. Was it a light creak, suggesting a small person, or a heavier groan, hinting at a larger frame? Was it a single creak or a series of small, hesitant movements? My memory was hazy, blurred by the initial shock and panic. It had been a distinct, undeniable creak. That was all I could be sure of. The details were lost in the fog of fear. And that lack of detail, that uncertainty, only amplified my terror, leaving my imagination free to conjure the most horrifying possibilities. I found myself holding my breath again, straining my ears, trying to catch any further sound. A footfall, a whispered word, a rustle of clothing. Anything that would break the suffocating silence, anything that would give me a clue as to what I was up against. But there was nothing. Only the distant chirp of crickets and the relentless, pounding rhythm of my own heart. The stillness was absolute, profound, and utterly terrifying. It was the kind of stillness that seems to absorb all sound, to swallow it whole, leaving behind an oppressive vacuum of silence. The warmth from the lamp, which earlier had felt so comforting, now seemed to highlight my vulnerability, making me feel exposed. A solitary figure illuminated against the vast, oppressive darkness of the room. I wished I could turn it off, plunge the room into complete darkness. Perhaps then I would feel less visible, less like a target. But even the thought of reaching for the lamp switch, of making that small movement, felt like an insurmountable risk. What if turning it off drew attention to me? What if the sudden darkness was exactly what they were waiting for? I could feel a strange buzzing in my ears, a sensation that seemed to come from within, a symptom of the intense stress and fear that was coursing through my body. My vision felt sharp, almost unnaturally so, as if my senses were hyper-alert, trying to compensate for the lack of auditory information. Every shadow seemed to deepen. Every mundane object in the room seemed to take on a menacing quality, morphing into distorted shapes in the periphery of my vision. My imagination was running wild, a terrifying of potential horrors playing out in my mind. The minutes dragged on, each one an agonizing eternity. I felt a growing sense of helplessness, a profound despair settling over me. What could I do? Where could I go? The house, once my sanctuary, now felt like a trap, its familiar walls closing in on me, its comforting darkness transforming into a suffocating shroud. I yearned for the return of my parents, for the comforting sound of their car pulling into the driveway, for their familiar voices to shatter the oppressive silence. But they were still hours away, and I was left to face this terrifying ordeal alone. A small tremor ran through my body, a shiver that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. It was the coldness of pure, unadulterated fear. My teeth were clenched, my jaw tight, a physical manifestation of the mental tension I was enduring. I tried to focus on my breathing, to slow it down, to regain some control, but it felt shallow and ragged, betraying my inner panic. Every muscle in my body felt rigid, coiled tight, ready to spring, but with nowhere to go. The silence continued, unbroken, unrelenting. It was a silence that stretched on and on, a vast, empty expanse that seemed to mock my rising panic. I began to doubt myself, to question if I had even heard the creak in the first place. Was it all in my head? Was I conjuring this terror out of thin air, a result of an overactive imagination fueled by a suspenseful novel? But no, the sound had been too clear, too distinct, too undeniably real. It was etched into my memory, a chilling auditory imprint that refused to be dismissed. My gaze returned, almost compulsively, to the hallway, that dark, silent portal to the unknown. I found myself scrutinizing the shadows, searching for any flicker of movement, any change in the darkness. It was a futile exercise, I knew, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. It was as if my mind needed to confirm what my ears had already told me, to see the proof of the intrusion, even if that proof was only the continued, unnerving absence of any visual information. The waiting was excruciating, a slow, drawn-out torture that felt far worse than any immediate threat. I closed my eyes again, and this time I tried to focus on a different kind of sound, the imagined sound of safety, of normalcy. The distant hum of traffic, the familiar voices of my parents, the comforting clatter of dishes in the kitchen. But those sounds were elusive, fading quickly, replaced by the relentless pounding of my heart and the oppressive silence of the house. The reality of my situation was too stark, too overwhelming to be wished away. I was home alone, and the front door had creaked. And that simple, terrifying fact was all that mattered in that moment. The air in the room felt heavy, thick with unspoken dread. It was as if the very atmosphere itself had become saturated with my fear, pressing down on me, making it difficult to breathe, to think. I felt utterly helpless, a solitary figure caught in a terrifying tableau, with no clear path to escape, no immediate hope of rescue. The minutes continued to tick by, each one amplifying the sense of isolation and vulnerability. I yearned for the simple, comforting familiarity of everyday life, for the mundane, for the world to return to its predictable, safe rhythms. But that world had been irrevocably shattered by a single, terrifying creak. My eyes, now wide and bloodshot from the strain, continued their relentless vigil on the dark hallway. I felt a strange mix of dread and a perverse fascination, a need to know, to see, what was lurking beyond my immediate sight. It was a terrifying paradox, this yearning for confirmation of my fears. What would I do if I saw something? What action could I possibly take? My mind offered no answers, only more questions, more terrifying possibilities. The silence continued, a vast, empty canvas upon which my fear painted its most vivid and unsettling images. It was a silence that spoke volumes, a chilling narrative of an unseen presence, an unspoken threat. The clock on the mantelpiece chimed softly, marking the half hour, a delicate, almost ethereal sound that seemed impossibly loud in the profound stillness. It startled me, making me jump, a small, involuntary twitch of my body. My heart leaped into my throat, a sudden, sharp lurch that took my breath away. I squeezed my eyes shut, cursing myself for being so jumpy, for betraying my presence with even that small movement. When I opened them again, I half expected to see a shadowy figure standing in the doorway, drawn by the sound of the chime, by my involuntary reaction. But the hallway remained dark, silent, and empty, or so it seemed. The fear, which had been a constant, dull throb, now sharpened, intensifying with renewed vigor. The chime had been a stark reminder of the passage of time, of how long I had been sitting there, frozen in terror. How much longer could I endure this silent standoff? How long before the unknown presence decided to reveal itself, to make its move? The questions gnawed at me, relentless, unforgiving. I felt a desperate need to act, to do something, anything, to break this agonizing stasis. But every instinct screamed at me to remain still, to stay silent, to make myself as small and invisible as possible. I thought of my phone again, the small, glowing rectangle of potential salvation. It was so close, yet so impossibly far. The mental debate raged within me, a silent, frantic argument. The risk of being heard versus the risk of remaining helpless. The balance felt impossibly delicate, poised on a knife edge. What was the greater danger, to act or to remain utterly passive? My mind, usually so decisive, was now a whirlwind of indecision, paralyzed by fear. A faint scratching sound, almost imperceptible, seemed to emanate from the hallway. It was so faint, so delicate, that I almost dismissed it as my imagination, a trick of my hyper-alert senses. But then it came again, a tiny, repetitive scraping like fingernails against wood or something dragging lightly across the floor. My breath hitched in my throat once more, a sharp, painful intake of air. This was it. This was the moment. The confirmation I had dreaded, the undeniable proof that I was not alone. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to run, to hide, to scream. But my body remained frozen, locked in place by an invisible, unyielding force. My eyes were wide, unblinking, fixed on the hallway, trying to pierce the gloom to see the source of that chilling sound. The scratching continued, a slow, deliberate rhythm moving closer, ever so slightly closer with each agonizing second. It was a sound that spoke of malicious intent, of a slow, terrifying advance. The air in the room felt impossibly cold now, a coldness that seemed to seep into my very bones. My throat was completely dry, raw from the tension. I swallowed, a painful, rasping sound that felt impossibly loud in the profound silence. My heart was pounding, a frantic, desperate drumbeat against my ribs, threatening to burst from my chest. I could feel the cold sweat trickling down my spine, a chilling river of fear. This was no longer just a creak. This was an active, undeniable presence, moving slowly, deliberately towards me. And I was utterly, completely helpless. The scratching stopped as suddenly as it had begun. The abrupt cessation of the sound was almost as terrifying as its presence. It left behind an even deeper, more profound silence, a silence pregnant with expectation, with the heavy weight of an imminent reveal. My breath was held captive in my lungs, my entire body rigid, every muscle screaming with tension. I waited, my eyes wide and unblinking, fixed on the dark hallway, dreading what might emerge from its depths. The silence stretched, long and excruciating, each second an eternity, each moment filled with the terrifying anticipation of the unknown. Then a shadow detached itself from the deeper gloom of the hallway. It was slow, deliberate, a vague, undefined shape at first, barely perceptible against the background of darkness. But as it moved, inch by agonizing inch, towards the threshold of the living room, it began to coalesce, to take on a more distinct, more terrifying form. It was tall, impossibly tall, and slender, its outline a jagged silhouette against the slightly less dark wall behind it. My breath caught in my throat, a choked gasp that died before it could fully escape. This was real. This was happening. My mind screamed for me to move, to run, to do anything, but my body remained stubbornly, terrifyingly frozen. It was as if I was trapped in a nightmare, unable to stir, a helpless observer of my own impending doom. The figure continued its slow, deliberate advance, its movements almost fluid, eerily silent. It was almost at the threshold now, just a few feet from the edge of the lamp's golden circle, where the light met the encroaching darkness. My eyes darted around the room, desperately searching for an escape, a weapon, anything. But there was nothing, only the vast, empty expanse of the living room, offering no refuge, no protection. The figure paused, just at the edge of the light, its form now clearer, more defined, yet still shrouded in an unnerving ambiguity. I could make out a head, slightly tilted, as if listening, observing, taking me in. There were no features, no discernible face, just a dark, smooth expanse, a void where eyes and mouth should be. It was utterly terrifying, this faceless presence, far more horrifying than any monster my imagination could have conjured. My blood ran cold, a glacial river flowing through my veins, chilling me to the very core of my being. I felt a scream building in my throat, a primal, guttural cry of pure terror, but it remained trapped, suffocated by the overwhelming fear. My mouth was dry, my tongue felt heavy and unresponsive. I was utterly paralyzed, a helpless witness to my own horrifying reality. The silence in the room was absolute, profound, broken only by the frantic, deafening pounding of my own heart, a drumbeat that seemed to echo in the vast emptiness. The figure remained motionless, poised at the threshold, an ominous, silent sentinel simply being. Then, incredibly, it took another step, a slow, deliberate movement that brought it fully into the periphery of the lamp's light. Its form, though still indistinct, seemed to solidify, to gain a disturbing three. I could see the subtle shift of fabric, a dark, heavy material that seemed to absorb what little light it encountered. It was wearing something long, flowing like a cloak or a very heavy coat that draped down to its feet, concealing everything beneath. There was no sound, not even the softest rustle of cloth. It was a silent, spectral presence, moving with an unnatural grace. My eyes darted to my phone again, a desperate, fleeting thought. Could I make a break for it? A sudden lunge, a desperate grab. But the figure was too close now, its presence too overwhelming. Any sudden movement from me would be an invitation, an undeniable confirmation of my existence and my vulnerability. No, I was trapped, utterly and completely at its mercy. The realization settled over me with a heavy, sickening weight, crushing any remaining hope. The figure raised its hand, slowly, deliberately, a long, slender appendage that seemed to stretch unnaturally, extending from the folds of its dark garment. There was something unsettling about the movement, a jerky, almost mechanical quality that the natural fluidity of a human limb. It wasn't menacing, not overtly, but it was profoundly unsettling, a gesture that seemed to belong to something not quite of this world. My breath hitched in my throat, a silent gasp of terror. What was it doing? What was it going to do? My mind raced, trying to interpret the gesture to understand its meaning. Was it a greeting, a warning, a prelude to something far more sinister? The ambiguity was horrifying, leaving my imagination free to conjure the most terrifying possibilities. The hand, or whatever it was, continued to rise slowly, steadily, until it was level with its faceless head, hovering there, still and silent. The air in the room felt impossibly heavy, charged with an unspoken tension, an unbearable weight of dread. I could feel tears stinging my eyes, a desperate, silent plea for this nightmare to end, for the world to return to its comforting, predictable normalcy. But the figure remained, solid and undeniable, a chilling testament to the terrifying reality I found myself in. My entire body trembled, a barely controlled shudder that racked my frame. I was on the verge of breaking, on the precipice of utter, complete hysteria. But even that relief was to me, as if an invisible hand was pressing down on my throat, stifling any sound, any outward expression of my profound terror. Then a sound, distinct and horrifying, broke the absolute silence. It was a soft, guttural click, a low, grating noise that seemed to emanate from the figure itself. It was a sound that was utterly alien, something unnatural and deeply disturbing, far removed from any human vocalization. It was the sound of a mechanism, perhaps, a bone grinding or something else entirely, something that logical explanation. And it was directed at me. My blood ran cold, a fresh wave of icy terror washing over me, making my entire body shiver uncontrollably. The figure tilted its head further, as if examining me, its faceless gaze somehow piercing through the darkness, seeing into the deepest recesses of my fear. The click sound repeated, softer this time, almost a whisper, yet still carrying that same chilling, unnatural quality. It was a communication, I realized with a fresh surge of dread, a terrible, unspoken language that filled me with an existential horror far beyond mere physical fear. It was the sound of something utterly, profoundly other. I closed my eyes tightly, desperately, squeezing them shut, willing it all to disappear, to be nothing more than a waking nightmare, a vivid hallucination. I yearned for the comforting darkness of my eyelids, for the brief respite from the horrifying sight before me. But even with my eyes closed, the image of the tall, faceless figure, its unnaturally extended hand, and the chilling, mechanical click sound was burned into my mind, an indelible imprint of terror. When I finally dared to open my eyes again, slowly, hesitantly, the figure was still there, exactly as I had left it, standing motionless at the edge of the light, its faceless head tilted, its hand still raised. The silence that followed the click was once again profound, a heavy, expectant stillness that was almost more terrifying than any sound. It was waiting, I realized with a fresh jolt of fear. It was waiting for me, for a response, for a reaction. My mind was a chaotic mess, a jumble of panicked thoughts and terrifying images, making any coherent thought impossible. What could I do? What could I possibly say or do in the face of such an unnatural, terrifying presence? My throat remained dry and constricted, making speech impossible even if I had the words. My body remained rooted to the armchair, every muscle screaming with tension, but utterly unresponsive. I was completely at its mercy. The figure took another step, a slow, deliberate movement that brought it even further into the living room, closer to me. The darkness of its form seemed to deepen, to intensify, absorbing the light around it, creating a small, localized void in the otherwise dimly lit room. My breath caught in my throat, a choked gasp that barely escaped my lips. It was closer now, much closer, its oppressive presence filling the air, suffocating me with its alien stillness. And then it began to shrink. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, its tall, slender form seemed to compact, to condense, like a shadow retracting into itself. My eyes, wide with disbelief and renewed terror, watched in horrified fascination as its height diminished, its elongated limbs drawing inward, its overall silhouette becoming smaller, more compact. It wasn't shrinking in the conventional sense, not dissolving or disappearing, but rather contracting, folding in on itself, becoming denser, darker, more intensely present, even as its size diminished. The movement was silent, unnerving, defying all laws of physics and biology. It continued to shrink steadily until it was no taller than a small child, a dark, compact mass of shadow huddled at the edge of the light. My fear, which had been a towering, all-consuming edifice, now shifted, transforming into a bewildered, disorienting terror. What was happening? What was this thing?